Welcome! We're so glad you're here joining us at The Leading Edge, Region 13's new series for innovative school leaders. Joining me today is Jonathan Delgado to share with us about the A through F accountability ratings coming out now in 2018. We're so glad you're here to share this information with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to talk about A through F and a couple of things before I get into it. That the system is still being developed, so what I'm going to focus on today is sort of big picture items, not necessarily the nitty-gritty pieces of the framework, but just overall some big picture items as we move into A through F accountability ratings next year. Okay? So, A through F accountability, it's happening. And we're going to have our first A through F ratings in August of 2018. So to give you sort of a perspective on the accountability system, we're moving from an index system to a domain system. So our old index system was over 4 specific indexes of student achievement and performance. Index 1 was over student achievement, Index 2 was over student progress, Index 3 was over closing performance gaps, and Index 4 was about post-secondary readiness for high schools and for districts. So with that index system, we had 2 labels for campuses and districts. Either you met the standard, or if you didn't meet any of the targets for those indexes, you were improvement required. So now we're moving into the A through F system. We had House Bill 2804, which now became House Bill 22, which tweaked this rating system. But now we're going to have overall ratings of A, B, C, D, or F for campuses and districts. So how do we get an A, B, C, D, or F for your campus and district? So there's 3 domains. We used to have 4 indexes, now it's 3 domains. Domain 1 is over student achievement, Domain 2 is over student progress, Domain 3 is over closing performance gaps. So how it's going to work is that you're going to receive an overall letter grade for each domain. You're going to receive an overall letter grade for Domain 1, student achievement, Domain 2, student progress, and Domain 3, closing the gaps. From there, TEA will then use either the best of student achievement or student progress, combine that with closing the performance gaps, about 30% of that, will then get you your overall letter grade. So 70% is either going to come from the higher of achievement or school progress, combining with 30% of closing the gaps to have your overall campus and district rating. The performance labels are A, B, C, D, and F, and if you think about it in terms of the old labels we used to have for campuses and districts in the 2000s, they're somewhat similar. A would be exemplary performance, B would be recognized performance, C would be acceptable performance, D would be in need of improvement, and F would be unacceptable performance. And TEA has said that F is going to be similar to what we have now in terms of if you have an F, that's basically saying that you are in improvement required. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about those 3 domains. I'm going to focus first on student achievement. So before I get into how this is going to work, I think it's important that we review the performance levels on STAR because that's going to factor into this, and you have to have a good understanding of what those performance labels are. So in the past, we had STAR performance labels, and they were like level 1, level 2, level 3. There was a TEA label, or the label that TEA would use, level 1, 2, and 3, but there was sort of a public label, like an unofficial of maybe unsatisfactory, satisfactory, post-secondary ready, and advanced. There was some confusion as to which was what. So TEA decided to redo the performance labels this year. So there's official and public labels, and they're both the same. So those new labels are does not meet, which kind of relates to unsatisfactory or level 1 performance. Approaches grade level performance is satisfactory. I know it sounds a little different. Approaches means passing, but that is the case. Approaches is satisfactory performance. Meets relates to post-secondary readiness or final level 2 performance. And masters is basically level 3 or advanced performance on STAR. So with those labels, there's specific definitions as to what they mean. For example, does not meet, that would mean that the student is unlikely to succeed in the next grade level without significant ongoing academic interventions. Approaches grade level, the student is likely to succeed with maybe targeted academic interventions. Meets grade level, Those students would have maybe some short-term targeted academic intervention as they move to the next grade level, and students that are masters need little or no academic intervention as they move forward. Okay, so now we're moving into the construction of this domain. So what TA will do is they'll look at all tests taken at every campus and district. So if you're at a campus, they'll look at all tests taken at your particular campus. That's the denominator. Then what they'll do is look at, of those total tests taken, what is the number that are at approaches grade level and above? So of all the tests that were taken, what is the number that passed? And you're going to have from there a percentage. In this example, we have 92.7 of those total tests that are at approaches grade level or above. Then, and this is new, what TEA will do is look at, of those total tests, what are the number that are at meets grade level and above? You're going to get another percentage. In this case, it's going to be 60.6. And then what TEA will do is look at, of all the total tests, what is the number that are at master's grade level, and you'll get a percentage from there. Then what's going to happen is those three percentages will be added together, divided by 3 to get an average, and then in this example, that becomes 60.2. So what TEA has said is that 60 and above is going to be considered A performance. So why 60? Well, 60 ties into the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board's plan of, by 2030, at least 60% of Texans aged 25 to 34 will have a certificate or a degree. So tying into that, it's going to be 60 and above to have A performance on this domain. So this is different because in the past it was just all about passing on STAR. And that's a component of this now, one component. But it's also the number that meets grade level and the number that masters. So all three of those performance levels are going to factor into this domain score. So if you are in elementary or middle school, 100% of that domain score is going to come from STAR performance. If you're a high school though, a portion of it's going to come from STAR, and also students in high school graduate, so graduation rates will factor into that. And then of those graduates can be considered either college, career, or military ready. And there's a certain set of indicators that indicates if that student is college or career or military ready. So those factors are going to factor into your overall domain score rating too. So STAR, CCMR, graduation rates for high schools. So it's sort of an overarching view of what Domain 1 would look like. So let's talk about Domain 2, student progress. For student progress, there's actually two parts to this. I'm going to talk about the first one, which is student growth. So, okay, remember those performance levels on STAR, right? Mm-hmm. So this is very similar. So we're looking not at specifically achievement, but on growth. So in this example, we have a student last year who maybe was a third grader. And now as a fourth grader, TEA will measure growth from last year to this year in terms of performance levels or meeting STAR growth expectations. So for example, last year we had a student, maybe they performed at approaches. And let's look at the green line. Last year the student goes from approaches to this year meets grade level performance. If that's the case, the student sort of exceeds their growth target, so they're awarded 1 point. Another example, last year the students had approaches, and if we go on the blue line, the student performs this year at approaches. But they have expected growth expectations for performance, and so they're also awarded 1 point. So 1 point for exceeding or having expected growth. So something new is that last year there wasn't a way to get half a point. There is now. So last year in this example, the student's at approaches and maybe does exactly the same in terms of maybe scale score this year on STAR. So the orange line, approaches last year to approaches this year. The student does not meet growth expectations, but he maintains proficiency from last year to this year. If that's the case, TEA would award half a point for this example. Lastly, if a student goes from approaches to maybe does not meet or has regression, then no points would be awarded for this domain. Here's another way of looking at that example. Again, we're looking at performance levels, and in this case on the left-hand side we have previous year performance levels and current year. So if you just kind of follow along the rows and columns. For example, if a student goes from approaches last year to maybe meets or masters, there's growth, there's improvement, and they could either have 1 point. For example, if the student goes from meets last year to approaches, well, the student still passed, right? But going from meets to approaches would award you no points for this domain. Okay? So for all students that test, all these different factors into getting either 1 point or half a point or no points would be part of this domain. The other part is relative performance. So what TA is going to do is that they will look at all campuses in the state, like all elementaries and all middle schools, and they're going to scatter plot out performance. So if you look on the left-hand side axis, that would be student achievement or domain 1 overall performance on STAR. And at the bottom, that would be the percentage of economically disadvantaged students at maybe all the elementaries or all the middle schools. So they'll scatter plot out all campuses. So as an example, maybe if you are a green dot campus, maybe you have fewer economically disadvantaged students, and on average you would have higher levels of student achievement performance. A red dot campus would have maybe more economically disadvantaged students, and on average would have lower levels of student achievement. So if TA looks at all campuses in the state, what they're going to do is develop an average. And from there, they will determine bands in terms of what is A, B, C, D, and F. So for example, a campus maybe with higher economically disadvantaged students, in terms of this A band, would need a certain amount, maybe not the highest, but a certain amount to be A or B or C or D. And that's the other part of this component. So the last domain is closing the gaps. Now, before, the other two domains that I talked about dealt with all students at your campus and district. This is the first domain now that we're talking about that gets into sub-pops, like student groups meeting minimum size. So not just all students, but maybe all 7 race ethnicities that meet minimum size, like Hispanic, African American, and so on. Also students who are SPED students, students that are continuously enrolled in mobile, which is a new student group, students who are English language learners, and students on free and reduced lunch or economically disadvantaged students. So the idea is that we have all these student groups, and those student groups that meet minimum size would then have to meet certain indicators, and some of these are carryovers from Index 1 and 2. Like all those student groups might have to meet achievement in reading, math, writing, science, and social studies, so STAR performance. Other groups might have to meet growth in reading or math, sort of related to domain 2. Maybe for high schools, those student groups would have to meet graduation rates or be college, career, and military ready. So the idea is that for all the student groups applicable at your campus and district, those student groups would have to meet certain achievement targets. And depending on the number of groups that meet or do not meet, that would give you an overall domain grade for domain 3. So again, you have 3 domains, and each of those are going to be graded. So you'll have 3 domain letter grades. TEA was going to use the higher of student achievement or student progress. That's going to be about 70% of your overall letter grade. Then the domain letter grade for closing the gaps will be 30%. From there, TA will combine those two to get an overall letter grade for your campus and district. And that's basically how it's going to work next year, without getting into the nitty-gritty, but just some overarching framework for this system.
It's really helpful to hear. Great. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. So I'm listening to you, and I am thinking as a campus principal right now, this new system's coming out, and part of it is about communicating with families and the public about how the school is performing and the quality of the education. And I'd love for you just to talk a little bit about, as a campus principal, in terms of how can I help others understand what this system means? Because I'm imagining parents, for example, seeing a C rating, which if you go back, you showed me a slide that a C rating is acceptable progress for students. But I know a lot of folks in their mind are going to be seeing that C, and C is typically not something we want to be. We want to ace things, right? That is the common accepted thing. So can you just tell me a little bit about, how might we go about helping folks understand just what this means and what it means for the work that's happening on campus.
Sure. So this system kind of moves from either meeting standards or being unacceptable. So now there's additional levels of achievement, so to speak. And like I said before, this is 3 domains, but 70% of your overall grade is either going to come from achievement, and we're talking about achievement on state tests, so STAR, TELPAS, or growth, so performance from last year to this year. And that's a huge portion of what determines your overall letter grade. So if I was a principal or superintendent, I would think about it in terms of either being proficient this year or moving towards academic success in terms of student growth on the state assessments, because it's such a huge piece of your overall letter grade. A portion of that, 30%, is from closing achievement gaps, which relates to federal requirements in terms of looking at individual student groups and performance. So making sure that one student group isn't being left behind as we move forward. So that's still an important component of that. Looking at achievement, looking at growth, and then individual student groups. It really comes down to not just passing, but higher levels of achievement and growth, and also looking at all student groups. So basically, having students not just pass the test, but looking at higher levels of achievement and growth, focusing on all the students.
Mm-hmm. So maximizing learning for each and every one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that actually, in some ways, is a fair way of looking at what's going on many campuses, the work that's happening where we're continuously helping students do better each year. So
yeah.
That's good news to hear that that's one way that it could be reflected in the accountability ratings. One of the other questions I had as I was listening, in addition to thinking about communicating about the accountability ratings, but I'm also thinking about, is there other benefits to the new system? It sounds like it's not just clearer, but also designed to include a lot more data points.
Yes.
And can you just speak to that briefly of how that's a shift from the current system to the new one, some of the new information that's included in that data that can help campuses really get a picture of how they're doing?
Sure. So again, there are lots of data points, and there's some that I even haven't got into because that could be a full day training if we wanted it to. But there's so many different indicators. So it's not just STAR, but also maybe students can be college and career and military ready. And then looking at growth too as a big factor. Not just passing, but also passing in terms of 4 different performance levels on STAR. And I know people think about different performance levels and they're like, wasn't it just pass? Like, what's the percentage to pass? And that's not the case. So I would really focus on looking at a raw score conversion table. So if you look at TEA's webpage, they do publish what's called the STAR raw score conversion table. So if you look at maybe 2016-17 to get an idea, and I pulled this for grade 5 math. So what this says is that on the STAR test for grade 5 math, there's the number of questions, a raw score, a scale score, and then that relates to a performance level. We talked about those. Does not meet, approaches, meets, and masters. And in the past, administrators might have actually focused on just getting students from does not meet to approaches, or from failing to passing. And there's so much more than just that in this accountability system. One, you have to know a little bit more about the different raw scores and scale scores, but also not just one level of passing. There's also, yes, going from not passing to passing, but also from approaches to meets and meets to masters, because that factors into domain 1, which again could be 70% of your rating. So you have to know not just one performance level, but essentially 3, because there's 4 different levels on every STAR test. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that it's not just about passing, but different levels of passing on STAR.
It's great. So really providing an opportunity for growth beyond just that pass-fail moment. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know this is a lot of information, but thank you, Jonathan, for sharing it with us.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I know that there's a lot that I didn't talk about in terms of complexities, and there's still a lot that hasn't been decided, for the system. So as soon as I have any updates, I'd be happy to come back and share anything new as we move into ratings come this August 2018.